So as I mentioned, we're here today talking about rapid response collecting. Both of our presentations today have a particular focus on COVID-related web archiving, which I think is something a lot of us have been thinking a lot about over the past 2 years. Though, as you all know from watching the presentations on Vimeo, much of what they discuss is applicable in context beyond COVID as well. So without further ado, I am joined today by Tom Smyth. Tom is the manager of the Web and Social Media Preservation Program in the Digital Collections and Operations Division at Library and Archives Canada. He is here today discussing his presentation, Rapid Response Methodologies and Projects Documenting National Historic Events at Library and Archives Canada. And I'm also joined by Melissa Wertheimer. Melissa is a music reference specialist and music division web archives lead at the Library of Congress. She is here discussing her presentation, When Time and Resources Are of the Essence, Archival Appraisal and the Library of Congress Coronavirus Web Archive. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Tom, who will give a brief summary of his presentation. Then I'll pass it on to Melissa, who will summarize hers, and then we'll get into some discussion. Again, as you're listening, please submit questions in the Q&A. So take it away, Tom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for your time today. Glad to be here today to participate in the panel and discuss rapid response methodologies and projects. My talk was on the history of rapid response projects methodologies since about 2011 was when we began. We began in a very ad hoc manner. We really early on, we were reacting in an emergency manner, reprioritizing resources, scrambling to get primary resources documenting a major historical event and its impact on Canada. This activity really picked up in around 2013 or 14, I would say. And around one of our early means of adapting and trying to get ahead of these kind of events was in 2016 when we started doing, when we took more seriously the systematic collection of national level newspapers from coast to coast. We collect some 34 newspapers from coast to coast in both official languages in Canada, those being English and French, representing different political spectrum, different political opinions, regional, cultural perspectives. And our 34 newspapers include Indigenous and a few other languages in Canada. Owing to this means of adapting to events, we started picking up news about COVID in about December of 2019. And as we stand, we've collected quite a few national events. I think we'll get into that in a bit. But to date, we've collected over 2,000 resources, constituting about 10 major themes with sub-themes, about 480 million documents, about 4 million tweets, comprising some 16 terabytes of data. Current to today. So part of our methodology was adapting project management approaches to web archival curation. What we wanted to do was better define exactly what we were trying to document within a historic event, define some themes according to what we would think of as a library collection development policy. And in so doing, we were channeling the resources toward the documentation of the themes that we really wanted to concentrate on. So we were with the resources that we have available. So the talk was about how we manage our resources and automate a lot of the media collection. In particular, how we would treat each individual theme within a major event in a sort of descending priority, which would impact how much FTE hours we would put into it, and even the quality control level. So that's it in a nutshell. I'll turn it now over to Melissa.
Hey everybody, greetings from Washington, DC. My name is Melissa Wertheimer, and I'm so excited to be here. I've attended Iipc, but this is my first time presenting at Iipc. So the summary of my presentation is, well, of course, we're talking about COVID, right? But more importantly, how I applied archival appraisal theory and characteristics and methods to the curation of the Library of Congress's Coronavirus Web Archive. We had to actually do a massive stop of crawling because the library had hit its data budget. And what do you do when you run out of space? And archivists and librarians encounter this all the time. Well, we run out of shelf space. I guess it's time to start weeding out copy 2 and copy 3, or hey, maybe it's time for us to rent an offsite storage facility for our massive special collections. Well, we need more servers because we're getting more born digital records for our special collections creators. So appraisal is always the answer. And I from where I'm sitting, web archives are no different. So I talked about a rubric that I created that our project team, which included subject experts across the library, used to narrow down the over 2,000 websites that were nominated to this collection before it was a formal collecting effort, narrow those down, as well as determine how we can only nominate 250 new URLs. So in 2020, we were limited to 250 new URLs, 200 for US-based sites and 50 for non-US. So when we go from over 2,000 URLs down to just under 500, Appraisal did its job. So I go over a little bit of a summary of American and Canadian archival theory, and I'm also going to wave to our Australian and New Zealand friends as well, because we all kind of share the same theoretical background in that way. So basically, Appraisal came up in the amazing keynote talk as well. And so I think this is starting to become more of a theme, and making sure that we're including all of the people who practice web archiving and archivists who have a strong background in theory and praxis around selection. I think we have a lot to offer. So that's what I presented on.
Great, thank you so much to you both for those summaries. I just want to start us off in a really kind of general way. Maybe I'll direct this to you, Tom. Did working on your COVID-19 collections give you perspective on the pandemic that you feel that you otherwise may not have had? And maybe relatedly, did working on these collections give you perspective on what it means for archivists or librarians to work on collections related to traumatic events?
Absolutely. I should mention right away that the web archiving team at the National Library and Archives Canada is hybrid, comprises digital librarians and digital archivists working together, bringing their unique perspectives and including their library archival disciplines to bear on our web archival curation and selection and evaluation. It's been now since 2011, as I mentioned, and often what ends up happening is that you are curating these rapid response methodologies are developed largely to document unhappy events that are not very pleasant sometimes. And I don't want to call them disaster collections, but that's effectively what they are a lot of the time. So especially in the context of COVID, the curators can learn a great deal more about COVID and its impact, and the medical science and whatnot, the impact on Canada at writ large. This can be overwhelming. This is a lot of information to internalize, and while you're in the midst of living your personal life through a pandemic. So we wanted to be sensitive to this, like the idea of trauma-informed curation of archival records in general is a big topic now in archival science. We wanted to be sensitive to that, and we adopted a strategy whereby the sensitive or maybe the not very happy topics that need to be documented would be done so in a minimalist manner, which is to say that people wouldn't have a lot of exposure to it, that those kind of topics wouldn't be assigned to a single curator for a long period of time. It would be something that would cycle among all the team. So this is how we approached it for the number of the events that were not very pleasant, and we've been doing that, I'd say, since about 2018.
Thank you. Melissa, I'll give you a chance to respond to that as well, but I'm also really curious about your perspective as a music reference specialist and how you felt working on this collection gave you a perspective on how the pandemic impacted the music community or the music industry.
Yeah, so even though we're called the music division, we actually document all of the performing arts. So we're talking about jazz, musical theater, rock, pop, the Western art tradition, dance. So something that I do in my work as a reference specialist is doing reference and some acquisitions and also web archiving for all of those areas. And when it came to working for the pandemic, my general assignment was social and cultural. So it wasn't just limited to my initial area. And so much of the pandemic, even if it started in science, it became culture and it became social. So there was a lot of weaving and crossover. So in terms of my perspective, I feel like even now still I'm leading this very weird double life because I have my personal experience, well, triple life. I have my personal experience just as a human in this traumatic time. And there's, loss and other emotions to process there. And then I have my life as a flutist. I'm an artist, I create, and, not being able to do that. And then simultaneously watching dear friends and colleagues of mine who don't have another job like I do completely lose all sources of income and security and means of survival. And then there's, the guilt that happens there. And I'm sitting in a very privileged place watching this happen in my community. And then the other part of me that doing this project did for perspective was having to always kind of have this sense of emotional removal. Like sometimes if I had trouble falling asleep at night and I'm like reading the news, which is the worst thing you can do, scrolling through your phone, trying to fall asleep at night, reading the news, thinking, oh, this website was mentioned in this Washington Post article. It's 11:30 at night. I'm going to email this to my work email and I'm going to put it through the appraisal rubric tomorrow and see if it makes it into the collection. So I was just had this weird sense of removal with that. So, and then the other issue is that also in the music division, I'm on the curatorial team and the stewardship team for our performing arts COVID-19 response collection, which is just a traditional special collection of paper and board digital materials of new works created during the pandemic by choreographers and songwriters and other performing artists. So I just feel like it's COVID saturation for me, but it's important because it's not going to go away. And I think just as the Great Depression was such a huge part of my grandparents' lives growing up and shaping their worldview, I like to think that I've been growing as a human because of this in all of the versions of myself that I mentioned.
And have you tried to employ, Tom mentioned a kind of trauma-informed approach. Have you tried to employ any strategies to kind of limit your exposure to traumatic materials? It sounds like you're quite saturated in it, but has LOC thought of that at all?
So I honestly don't know. I know that, so I don't run the coronavirus web archive project team. I'm one of many people. I do know that our team leaders are wonderful. You all heard from one of them, JJ Harpster, at the opening event. But yeah, I mean, it's nothing formal. I think I had to start to create more boundaries for myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's a comment in the chat about, not emailing content, like just trying to create some boundaries. So yeah. The answer is yes, but no.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So Tom, you sort of brought this up in your response, but I wonder if you can both speak to the fact that, is there a kind of tendency in event-based or rapid response web archiving to focus only on crises or disasters? And have you thought about any ways that we might try to temper that? Maybe I'll let either of you take that one.
They do tend to be, as we said, they tend to be unpleasant matters. I would think that there would be certainly events that would be happy, that would be unplanned and unanticipated, that we would be able to curate one day. But that said, I can't think of an example. I can't think of an example of such an event, but definitely that the methodology could be applied to any particular event for sure.
Yeah, I think our methods that we've talked about can definitely be applied to any event. As far as whether or not we are focusing overall on negative things, I like to give the archivist traditional response of, well, that depends. So it depends on the, I think on your institution. So for example, there's the IIPC Olympics collaborative collection, right? I mean, we would like to think it's a happy thing. We're celebrating like one of the longest traditions in humankind, right? So I think that's a great thing. Also at at the Library of Congress, there are a lot of election collections. Elections may or may not be a happy thing, but it's technically not a disaster. I mean, there are people who could argue that, but this is me speaking as a private citizen. So anyway, then you could also have, anniversaries of major holidays are also worth web archiving. Of course, you're going to have to determine what web content best represents the event and what is going on at the moment, and also whether or not it should be archived, and if web archiving is the best way to document that anniversary. But if there's a major centennial or bicentennial of a holiday, I would like to think that now that Juneteenth is a federal holiday, I would like to see in my future maybe a 25th or 50-year anniversary of the making of Juneteenth a federal holiday, and what that means for American people and also the Black community.
Yeah, great. I also wonder too if our tendency towards sort of crises or disasters in event-based web archiving reflects a kind of news bias towards crises or disasters, and that's how we tend to think about just the nature of historical events. But I will continue on with the next question. I know we have some coming in, so maybe I'll just ask one more and then we can try to get to some of the questions in the chat. What kind of ethical issues do you feel come up in relation to rapid response or event-based web archiving in situations where we have kind of urgency to collect, and COVID is a particular kind of anomaly, as there's not only urgency, but there was a need for practitioners to showcase that their work was important at a time when everybody was feeling uncertain. So in situations of urgency, how can we try to safeguard ethical practices? Maybe, Melissa, do you want to try to start with that one?
Sure. And this actually, so my answer is also going to partially answer Brenda Reyes-Ayala's question that's in the Q&A. So I guess we can sort of consider that as going to be answered with this answer.
Great.
So of course, the major ethical concern with COVID is how are we dealing with misinformation and disinformation? JJ Harpster touched on this a wee bit in the opening presentation, but I'm going to go into it more. So as far as the Library of Congress in particular, we have a permissions-based model for web archiving because of how our Office of the General Counsel has determined copyright needs to be observed, and it depends whether it's, which country is hosting the website, what is the type of content, is it government content, is it creative content, is it journalism, and then that pre-populates whether it's the twofold permission, the permission to crawl and then the permission to display off-site. So it is very much possible for something to be crawled and displayed on site only. So with that said, we were having a huge conversation in our group about misinformation and disinformation. All of these brand new URLs were being created, and part of uniqueness and authenticity when we're talking about archival values is all these new URLs that would not have existed if not for this moment, right? So why aren't we getting these? Well, technically, those were creative content created in the United States, and it would have required getting permission to crawl and permission to display. So what JJ was getting at in the initial IIPC presentation was that we didn't want them to receive a blanket email that said, we think this is of historical importance. We didn't want them to feel vindicated, right? So the ethical concern here is, would we be doing more harm? Right? So the solution that I proposed that the group really liked was going after an aggregator of misinformation. So I found NewsGuard, because they had a coronavirus misinformation tracking center, and some of those earliest captures are out of our 1-year embargo and are in the collection that Abby linked to in the chat. So what I liked about it was that it listed the URLs, so we would know for the future what were these new URLs that got created. But then when you click on that URL, it doesn't take you out of the NewsGuard website. What it does, it links to a PDF file, which is in the web archive, that contextualizes in a clear way how those websites were evaluated by the NewsGuard team with true journalistic fact-checking methods. So again, when we're talking about ethics, we need things to be contextualized. And, context is so important when we're also, in archives, we're talking about reparative description a lot in our finding aids and how we describe persons and events. And so thinking about all those things, right? So then other ethical concerns, of course, go to the ethics of care and trauma-informed work. So, of course, that's another ethical issue, right? And I am grateful that our team was large, because it did help to lighten the load, and that this wasn't all just thrown on to maybe 2 or 3 people.
Tom, did you want to jump in on that, or can jump to the questions from the chat as well?
I'll say real quick that there's a couple ideas there. I'll try to address a few that are in the Q&A as well. Our approach to social media is largely thematic. We don't spend a huge amount of time targeting individual accounts. We tend to collect things thematically in association with a web archival curation, with a collection. So, for example, for COVID, the way that we target Canadian content is by targeting particular hashtags that are identifiably Canadian. So an ethical issue would be, for all of us, so I'll raise it, I don't have an answer, but I'll bring it up, that do the folks that contributed to any particular hashtag at any time, are they aware that what they had to say is now part of the research data set associated with a web archival collection at LAC or anywhere else? When they were just commenting, really, like they didn't maybe intend for that comment or that perspective to be included in a research data set that would then be mined and used in the future for research primary source for writing the impact of COVID on Canada or anywhere else. So there's that. There's the matter of how do you handle the ethics of something that's mass collected and not individually targeted. That's something to bring up. In terms of the social media content, I was referring in my talk primarily to government material, federal government material. They'll, like, for example, like a comms area will generate a comms message and they'll distribute it on several social media networks. We would at times recognize that that's repetitious, and then we would just grab only the easiest platform from which we could reliably harvest that message. So we recognize in so doing that we're not, at the same time, we're not getting some of the commentary that would be present on another social media platform. And now you're getting into partial data. So there's that as well in terms of the impact on research, maybe even ethics.
Okay, great. I think you have both addressed a lot of what's coming in the chat. There's definitely interest, Melissa, in hearing more about the rubric. And one thing I'm curious about is you discuss in your presentation how technical questions related to web archiving, so questions around things like crawl frequencies, consideration of the archivability of certain platforms like Wix. So these types of questions can be framed as acts of appraisal. So what do you see as the benefits of doing that, of that sort of reframing?
Sure. So to answer the first little bitty part, I encourage you to watch the video when you can, because I break down each portion of the rubric and which archival values I selected to get a nice baseline. But, basic things, went into the rubric, like informational value, evidential value, uniqueness, authenticity, intrinsic value, and they were just a 1 to 3 low to high scale. And then I break down into how can those definitions in Archival translate directly to this collection. And then other instances, like, is it a US based site or not? All those other things also went into the rubric in order to get a final score, and then anything above a certain score threshold made it into the Web Archive. So that's the rubric part. So the larger question about technical acts being reframed as ones of appraisal. Technical appraisal is part of the process. You know, we're looking at technical feasibility. Is it worth my staff time? Is it worth our budget? Is it worth the storage? Is it worth all of these things to go after this object? And that can apply to a DAT, that can apply to email, that can apply to websites, right? So it's the same. Like, I don't see it as any different. So when it comes to technical appraisal, I'm keeping in mind that also that what I love about the web archiving community is that there are so many different types of information professionals involved, right? We have the software developers, we have archivists, librarians, digital humanists, so many wonderful people that contribute very unique perspectives. And I think that likewise, it's important for us to recognize when those different types of information professionals come from a community of practice that can help improve the work and experience of the other professionals in the field, right? So in this case, it's the praxis of appraisal theory that archivists have that we can then offer to our other professionals. Likewise, our very invaluable technologist friends, making sure that they are included in the process. So even though at the Library of Congress, for example, our web archiving team, they're not involved in selection. They do all of the amazing magic on our back end and dealing with our crawl schedule and with working with the vendor and monitoring QA, all of these amazing things that the selectors and appraisers like myself can't do because of how our program is laid out. Having them still be involved in that process, I think helps technical appraisal become the vehicle for a collective sense of ownership. So that's one way to think of it there. Also, appraisal, whether it's technical appraisal or not, appraisal is where it all starts. And the goal is always to curate, whether it's paper, whether it's AV, whether it's web archives. You want to curate the best collection possible that is the best evidence of whatever you are preserving so that it can be usable. So then the question is, well, who uses our content? And we have so many different types of users, and we focus a lot, and by we, I mean the web archiving community, not just the Library of Congress. We have so many different types of users, and we focus a lot on these data science scholars who want to do all this at-scale analysis, right? Which is fabulous and very much needed. That said, I also like to think about the type of users that come into my reading room on a Saturday, and they're looking for a general encyclopedia of rock history. They're just as important of a user. So what could that user look like in 80 years? They may say, well, you know, I heard about, there was this really obscure band that existed in the early 21st century. And what can I use to find out more about them? It's probably not going to be a printed book. It's going to be a web archive. So just thinking about that, there's going to be a parallel in how we serve our users and who our users are, and just keeping them all in mind, and that it all begins with appraisal and whether it could be technically feasible to get that content.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. You got a lot of love coming in various reactions for that. So thank you. Just as a follow-up, I see a question came through the chat from Pamela. Is there a place that folks can see the rubric? Is there, a link? Is it something that can be provided, or is it somewhere other than the video?
Okay. Other than the video, I will check with my people to see if that is documentation we can share. Speaking as a private citizen, it is a document that was created by a government employee in the course of their work, therefore it should be public record. And the whole point of appraisal is creating documentation that holds us accountable. I'm happy to find out if this is documentation that can be shared. So that is me putting my government hat back on. I'm happy to find out.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for one question, and because the idea of sort of usability and maybe access came up, Tom, I know that you at Library and Archives Canada, you're working on some general access portals and also I believe a COVID-19 portal. So I'm wondering if you could just speak if there are any sort of features or other aspects of an event-based or rapid response collection portal that you would ideally like to see.
We'll be launching our Government of Canada Web Archive access portal for our web archival collections. Will be appearing around October. It was down for redevelopment and redesign. One of the things that will be launched when we come back up is going to be our COVID collection in its entirety, I think. So the structure of that website as it stands is going back to the collection development policy. Sorry, I didn't get into a huge amount of details in terms of our evaluation and selection rubric in this presentation, because that was the subject actually of a whole nother paper. But I think we'll talk about that at another time. But in terms of the themes that we're documenting for any particular historical event, what you'd see in the access portal would be a discovery function whereby you could actually examine each one of those individual themes and drill down all the way to the seed level. So you'd get like an entire seed list of the entire collection. You'd get documentation, commentary on what these individual topics were, what we were trying to document. And you'd also get a web archival finding aid, which would be something like the project management document that defined the scope and all the details of the project. That would be published alongside the collection, which would be addressed to the researcher. And the point would be so that they'd have a really quick briefing document that would show them what this collection is, what scope in, what scope out, what the quality control level is, what the technical vocabulary is for metadata. And it will answer in a short time, is this data set relevant to my research question? So this is our vision for our access portal.
Fantastic, thank you. Melissa, I don't know if you wanted to jump in. We have like 1 minute left. If you've had any chance to think about access, how you would ideally like to see access for a COVID-19 portal or other event.
I'm not a UX.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm not a UX person. I know that full text is fabulous. I don't know if it's going to be the be all end all. I think it's going to be an invaluable tool. I think finding ways to make metadata digestible to non-information professionals is going to be important, and trying to figure out how that is going to be. We use Library of Congress subject headings and name authority files for enhanced metadata in our web archives, which is great. But I don't know what that future is going to look like, but trying to find ways that metadata can be readable by anyone. Because if web archives are representing cultural heritage, then that means that cultural heritage belongs to everybody. So we need to make sure that anybody can understand what it is that we're giving them.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so thank you both for this discussion, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions.